In a wood-paneled conference room overlooking Horse Guards Parade, a single typewritten minute lay on the polished table. The document, stamped Most Secret, recorded what field commanders and technical officers had known for months. The Cromwell cruiser tank, despite its impressive speed, could not reliably destroy German medium tanks beyond 800 yards. Outside, November rain drummed against blackout curtains. Inside, men from the Directorate of Tank Design studied firing trial photographs from Lulworth ranges, each image showing 75mm shells deflecting uselessly off-sloped armor plate. The British Army possessed mobility in abundance. What it lacked was killing power in a package small enough, fast enough, and reliable enough to support the cavalry doctrine that Montgomery's planners still demanded. Within 12 months, engineers would attempt something unprecedented, mounting near 17-pounder firepower in a turret barely larger than Cromwell's, without sacrificing the speed that made British cruisers valuable. The conference room on the third floor of the War Office had seen countless discussions about armor, guns, and tactics since 1939. But the meeting convened on the 18th of November, 1943, carried unusual weight. Around the table sat representatives from the Directorate of Tank Design, the Royal Armoured Corps School, the Royal Armament Research and Development Establishment, and senior liaison officers who had recently returned from North Africa and Italy. The subject under discussion was explicit. The Cromwell cruiser tank had reached the limit of what its turret ring and internal volume could accommodate. The A27M Cromwell represented, in many ways, the fruition of British cruiser tank philosophy. Powered by the 600-horsepower Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, a D-rated version of the legendary Merlin that powered Spitfires and Hurricanes, the Cromwell could achieve road speeds approaching 40 miles per hour under ideal conditions. Its Christie pattern suspension, inherited from earlier cruiser designs, provided excellent cross-country mobility. For reconnaissance, rapid exploitation, and pursuit operations, the Cromwell was exactly what cavalry-minded commanders wanted. But firepower told a different story. Cromwell mounted the ordnance quick-firing 75mm gun, a weapon derived from the 6-pounder and modified to use captured American 75mm ammunition stocks. While adequate against lighter German vehicles and fortifications, the gun struggled against the latest German medium tanks. Trials at the Lulworth Gunnery School had repeatedly demonstrated that standard 75mm armor-piercing shot could not reliably penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther tank beyond 800 yards, and the Panther was becoming the standard German medium tank by mid-1943. The problem was not merely ballistic. German tank production in 1943 exceeded British output by a substantial margin. Intelligence estimates suggested that German factories were producing more than 1,000 tanks and assault guns per month, while British production struggled to maintain 500 units across all types. More troubling still, German designs showed consistent improvement in armor protection and main armament. The Panther mounted the 7.5cm KWK-42 L70 gun, a high-velocity weapon with excellent armor penetration at extended ranges. The Tiger, though produced in smaller numbers, carried the legendary 8.8cm KWK-36, which could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. British planners faced a painful paradox. The cruiser tank doctrine demanded speed and mobility for exploitation and pursuit. Heavy tanks like the Churchill provided excellent armor protection but sacrificed the speed that cavalry operations required. The Cromwell offered mobility but insufficient anti-armor capability. The Challenger tank, a Cromwell variant with a taller turret mounting the 17-pounder gun, provided the firepower but at the cost of a high, vulnerable silhouette and problematic automotive reliability. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun itself represented Britain's best answer to German armor. Officially designated the Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder, the weapon fired a 76.2mm projectile at high velocity. With standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition, the 17-pounder could penetrate 130mm of armor plate at 1,000 yards. With the new armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds, still in limited production in late 1943, penetration exceeded 180mm under the same conditions. But the 17-pounder came with significant challenges. The gun was large, heavy, and required a substantial turret volume to accommodate its breech mechanism and recoil system. The Sherman Firefly, a modified M4 Sherman mounting the 17-pounder, proved effective in combat but required extensive modification to the turret and carried reduced ammunition stowage. The Challenger's tall turret, necessary to house the 17-pounder, made the vehicle conspicuous and difficult to conceal. Around the War Office table that November afternoon, the discussion focused on a fundamental question. Could British industry produce a gun offering 17-pounder class performance in a smaller, lighter package, one that would fit in a turret ring no larger than Cromwell's 64-inch diameter? If such a weapon could be developed, could it be mated to an improved Cromwell chassis with better armor protection and more reliable running gear? And could the resulting vehicle reach operational units before the war's end? The technical challenges were formidable. Reducing the 17-pounder size while maintaining its armor penetration capability would require either accepting reduced propellant charges, potentially compromising velocity and range, or developing more efficient ammunition and breech systems that could maintain performance with less internal volume. The turret would need to accommodate not just the gun but also the commander, gunner, and loader, plus ammunition stowage, sighting equipment, and radio apparatus. The hull would require improved armor, particularly on the glacis plate, while maintaining the automotive performance that made the Cromwell valuable. Yet the alternative was worse. Continuing with the Cromwell as the standard cruiser tank meant accepting that British armored divisions would enter France with inadequate anti-armor capability. Relying solely on the Firefly and Challenger meant accepting vehicles with known liabilities, reduced ammunition capacity in the Firefly's case, poor reliability and high silhouette in the Challengers. The Churchill, despite its excellent armor and infantry support capability, could not fulfill the exploitation role that Montgomery and other senior commanders envisioned for armored divisions in the coming invasion. By the meeting's end, the tank board had reached a provisional conclusion. Design work would proceed on a shortened 17-pounder, a weapon that would share the same projectile as the full-sized gun but use a reduced propellant charge in a more compact cartridge. Simultaneously, Leland Motors and Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company would study modifications to the Cromwell chassis. Wider tracks for better ground pressure, improved suspension components for reliability, thicker armor on the glacis and turret front, and whatever automotive improvements recent combat experience suggested. The program received the designation A34. No one at the table that November day knew whether it would reach operational units in time to matter. The invasion of France was scheduled for spring of 1944, barely 6 months away. Even if design work proceeded without delay, production, trials, and unit training would consume additional months. The new cruiser tank, if it succeeded at all, would almost certainly arrive late to the war. Still, the alternative, continuing with known inadequacies, was unacceptable. The minute was filed. The engineers received their instructions. The work began. The proof range at Farnborough had tested countless weapons since the Great War. On a cold morning in early January 1944, a peculiar-looking gun sat mounted on a static test rig, pointed downrange toward a series of armor plate targets. To the casual observer, it resembled a 17-pounder that had been cut down, which, in essence, it was. The technical designation read, Ordnance Quick-Firing 77mm Mark II High Velocity, though engineers simply called it the 77 HV, or the short 17-pounder. The weapon's development had proceeded with unusual speed. Within weeks of the November Tank Board meeting, engineers at the Royal Armament Research and Development Establishment had produced preliminary drawings. The concept was straightforward. Use the 17-pounder's 76.2mm projectile and basic barrel design, but reduce the cartridge case length and propellant charge to create a weapon with smaller overall dimensions and lighter recoil forces. Improved chamber design and more efficient propellants would partially offset the reduced charge, maintaining acceptable velocity and armor penetration. The full-sized 17-pounder measured over 200 inches in overall length and required substantial turret volume for its recoil system. The breech alone extended nearly 40 inches behind the turret ring, forcing designers to create tall turrets or accept severely cramped fighting compartments. The gun's recoil mechanism, though effective, was heavy and space-intensive. The 77mm HV addressed these problems through careful engineering compromise. The cartridge case measured 3 3/4 inches shorter than the 17-pounder's case, allowing a more compact breech and shorter recoil system. Total gun length decreased by approximately 18 inches. Crucially, recoil forces decreased enough to permit mounting in a turret with a 64-inch ring diameter, the same dimension as the Cromwell's turret. Ballistic performance, however, proved the critical test. The 17-pounder's effectiveness came from high projectile velocity and excellent armor-piercing ammunition. Any reduction in performance would negate the gun's purpose. Early calculations suggested the shorter cartridge and reduced propellant charge would cost approximately 150 feet per second in muzzle velocity with standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition, a meaningful but not catastrophic reduction. But the real revelation came with armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition. APDS rounds used a subcaliber tungsten carbide penetrator carried in a lightweight sabot that fell away after leaving the barrel. The lighter projectile achieved much higher velocities than conventional armor-piercing shot, dramatically increasing penetration at typical combat ranges. With APDS ammunition, the 77mm HV actually matched or exceeded the full 17-pounder's penetration at ranges below 1,500 yards, precisely the engagement distances most common in European combat. The January tests at Farnborough confirmed theoretical predictions. With standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition, the 77mm HV penetrated 118 mm of vertical armor plate at 1,000 yards, approximately 10% less than the full 17-pounder but substantially more than the Cromwell's 75mm gun. With APDS ammunition, penetration exceeded 170 mm at the same range, making the gun effective against any German tank's frontal armor except the Tiger II's thickest plates. Range tables prepared after the trials showed impressive capabilities. Against a Panther's frontal armor, 80 mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees from vertical, the 77mm HV with APDS could achieve penetration at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards under favorable impact angles. The Panther's own KWK-42 gun, despite its longer barrel and higher velocity, showed roughly comparable penetration with its standard ammunition. In a direct comparison of penetration capability, the compact British gun held its own against the German weapon that had terrorized Allied tankers in Normandy. Secondary characteristics proved equally important. The 77mm HV's shorter length and reduced recoil forces permitted faster turret traverse and easier gun laying. Gunners reported that the weapon balanced well, making fine adjustments easier during target engagement. The compact breech mechanism simplified loader access to ammunition storage, potentially increasing rate of fire. Reduced recoil meant less stress on the turret basket and turret ring, improving reliability and reducing maintenance requirements. Ammunition stowage presented both opportunities and limitations. The shorter cartridge cases permitted more rounds to fit in a given hull volume. Designers calculated that a Cromwell-sized vehicle could carry 61 rounds of 77mm ammunition versus 55 rounds of 17-pounder ammunition in the Challenger's much larger hull. More ammunition meant more tactical flexibility, more high-explosive rounds for infantry support, more armor-piercing rounds for extended engagements, more smoke rounds for screening maneuvers. Yet challenges remained. APDS ammunition, while devastatingly effective, showed problematic dispersion characteristics at extended ranges. The lightweight sabot separation process introduced variability that made hits beyond 1,500 yards uncertain. Production capacity for tungsten carbide penetrators was limited, and competition from other programs, particularly the 17-pounder equipped tanks and towed anti-tank guns, meant that APDS supplies would be constrained. Crews would need training in ammunition selection, learning when to use standard armor-piercing shot and when to employ the scarcer but more effective discarding sabot rounds. Still, the gun worked. It fit the space available. It provided the armor penetration capability that field commanders demanded. By late January 1944, the weapon existed not just on paper but as tested hardware with documented performance characteristics. The first challenge, creating a compact, high-velocity anti-tank gun, had been met. The question now shifted to integration. Could the gun be successfully mounted in a turret that maintained low profile and good ergonomics? Could that turret be mounted on a chassis that provided adequate armor, reliable automotive systems, and the mobility that British doctrine demanded? And could the complete vehicle be produced in meaningful numbers before the war's end? The answers would emerge over the following months as hull designs, turret castings, and automotive components moved from drawing boards to pilot production. The gun existed. The tank that would carry it forward into combat was about to take shape. The pilot hull rolled out of Leland's Leeds facility in early May 1944, just as Allied forces were completing final preparations for the Normandy invasion. Workers had spent weeks fabricating and welding the armor plates, each cut to dimensions that reflected hard lessons from 3 years of tank combat in North Africa, Italy, and the Soviet Union. The hull shape showed clear lineage to the Cromwell but incorporated significant improvements in armor layout, internal arrangement, and structural strength. The most visible change was the glacis plate, the sloped frontal armor protecting the driver and hull machine gunner. Where the Cromwell's glacis measured 63 mm thick at an angle of roughly 32 degrees from vertical, the A-34's glacis increased to 76 mm at a steeper slope. The increased thickness and improved angle provided substantially better protection against German anti-tank guns and tank cannons. Calculations suggested the A-34's glacis would resist the Panther's KWK-42 at ranges beyond 1,000 yards, a significant improvement over Cromwell's vulnerability. Side armor remained relatively thin, 32 mm on the hull sides and turret sides, but this represented acceptable compromise for a cruiser tank. Increasing side armor beyond 35 mm would add weight rapidly, compromising mobility and stressing automotive components. British tactical doctrine emphasized frontal protection, hull-down positions, and maneuver to avoid flank shots. The thin side armor reflected this philosophy. The turret represented the design's most significant challenge and achievement. The casting, manufactured by multiple subcontractors to ensure adequate production capacity, measured 64 inches in internal diameter, the same as the Cromwell's turret ring. Yet the turret accommodated the 77 mm HV gun, commander and gunner positions with adequate working room, and ammunition stowage for 61 rounds. This feat required meticulous internal layout and careful attention to every cubic inch of available volume. The turret's external shape optimized several competing requirements. The front maintained thickness of 101 mm around the gun mantlet, providing excellent protection against frontal shots. The roof was thinner, 20 mm, but adequate against artillery fragments and small arms fire. Overall height remained low, substantially lower than the Challenger's tall turret, making the vehicle easier to conceal and presenting a smaller target to enemy gunners. Suspension and running gear incorporated lessons from Cromwell's operational service. The Christie pattern suspension, retained from earlier cruisers, used 5 large road wheels per side with long travel vertical springs. But the A-34 increased track width from 14 inches to 15.5 inches, reducing ground pressure and improving cross-country performance. The wider tracks required redesigned track return rollers and modifications to the hull sides to accommodate the increased width. The powertrain was perhaps the A-34's greatest inheritance from Cromwell. The Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, essentially a Merlin without supercharger, provided 600 horsepower from its 27-liter V12 configuration. Unlike American radial engines or German inline designs, the Meteor ran on standard automotive gasoline rather than higher-octane aviation fuel, simplifying logistics. The engine's reliability, while not perfect, was substantially better than earlier British tank engines that had plagued the Crusader and Valentine designs. The Merritt-Brown transmission, a British design incorporating regenerative steering, allowed the driver to maintain power to the tracks during turns, improving automotive performance significantly. This system, combined with the Meteor's generous power output, gave the A-34 excellent acceleration and hill climbing ability. Calculations predicted a maximum road speed of approximately 30 miles per hour, fast enough for exploitation operations but not so fast as to compromise reliability or driver control. Weight emerged as a critical parameter. Each design decision, armor thickness, turret size, ammunition capacity, automotive components, added pounds. The final pilot vehicle weighed approximately 33 tons with full ammunition, fuel, and crew equipment. This represented a substantial increase over the 28-ton Cromwell but remained well below the 40-ton class that characterized heavier Allied tanks like the Sherman or German mediums like the Panther. The moderate weight meant the A-34 could use existing bridges and transporters that might not accommodate heavier vehicles. Production planning proceeded in parallel with pilot testing. The War Office, recognizing both the vehicle's potential and the invasion's imminent start, placed an initial order for 1,200 A-34 tanks in June 1944. Leland Motors served as prime contractor, with Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, English Electric, and multiple subcontractors contributing major components. The production plan called for deliveries beginning in September 1944, ramping to full capacity by December. Yet reality quickly intruded on these optimistic schedules. The Normandy invasion, launched on the 6th of June, consumed enormous quantities of equipment, ammunition, and spare parts. Production lines building Cromwells, Shermans, and Churchill tanks operated at maximum capacity just to replace combat losses and equip new formations. Shifting capacity to A-34 production would temporarily reduce output of proven designs, creating risk if the new vehicle encountered unexpected problems. Testing revealed the usual array of minor defects and necessary modifications. Early road trials showed excellent mechanical reliability, a first for a British cruiser tank in this war, but identified needed changes to the driver's controls, turret basket arrangement, and ammunition stowage details. Gunnery trials validated the 77mm HVS accuracy and armor penetration but highlighted the need for crew training in APDS ammunition handling and proper ammunition selection for different target types. The biggest delay, however, came from events far beyond British control. In mid-December 1944, German forces launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg. The offensive, soon known as the Battle of the Bulge, threatened to rupture Allied lines and created immediate demand for every available tank, regardless of type. Units scheduled to receive the new A-34 were issued Shermans instead, keeping the new cruiser in training areas while the crisis played out. By late December, Allied forces had contained the German offensive and begun pushing German units back toward the Rhine. The crisis passed, but precious time was lost. Units that might have received A-34 tanks in November or December 1944 now faced re-equipment schedules pushed into January or February 1945. The invasion of France had occurred in June. The breakthrough from Normandy in August. The liberation of Paris, Brussels, and Antwerp in August and September. The A-34 had missed all of it. Still, the vehicle existed. Production was underway. Training was progressing. And the final campaign, the assault into Germany itself, still lay ahead. If the A-34 Comet, as it was now officially designated, could reach operational units before that final push, it might yet prove its worth. The engineers and production workers had done their part. Now it was the Army's turn. The first production Comets left Leland's Leeds factory in September 1944, painted in the standard British Army dark olive drab, and bearing the manufacturer's brass data plates. Each vehicle underwent acceptance trials at the manufacturer's facility before transport to military depots for final preparation and unit assignment. By November, monthly production reached approximately 50 vehicles, with plans to increase to 90 vehicles per month by early 1945. Factory records tracked each vehicle's progress from initial hull fabrication through final acceptance. Serial numbers, stamped on major components, allowed tracing individual tanks through the production and supply system. Engine numbers matched Rolls-Royce's Meteor production logs. Transmission assemblies carried identification tags from the Merritt Brown factory. Guns bore ordnance factory markings and proof test certification. The entire supply chain, stretched across dozens of British manufacturing centers, converged at Leland's assembly lines. Initial deliveries went not to combat units but to training establishments and evaluation centers. The Armored Fighting Vehicle School at Bovington received several vehicles for instructor familiarization and preparation of training materials. The School of Tank Technology studied automotive performance and reliability. Gunnery schools examined the 77mm HVS ballistics and developed firing tables and engagement procedures. These preliminary steps, while time-consuming, were essential for successful operational introduction. Crews arriving at Salisbury Plain training areas in December 1944 found the Comet immediately recognizable as a British cruiser tank, yet distinctly different from the Cromwells they knew. The lower, more compact turret caught attention first. Experienced tankers noted the thicker glassy plate and improved hull shaping. Drivers appreciated the familiar Meteor engine but found the improved gearbox and steering system noticeably better than Cromwell's. Gunners studied the 77mm HV with professional interest, recognizing its potential while noting the different ammunition handling procedures. Training emphasized several key differences from Cromwell operations. The 77mm HV's higher velocity and flatter trajectory required different range estimation and aiming techniques. The availability of APDS ammunition introduced tactical decisions about ammunition selection. Standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap rounds for most targets, discarding sabot rounds for heavy armor or long-range engagements. Loaders practiced rapid ammunition selection and handling of the slightly different cartridge dimensions. Gunnery results exceeded expectations. On Salisbury Plain ranges, Comet gunners consistently achieved first-round hits on stationary targets at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The combination of excellent optics, the number 35 telescopic sight provided clear target imaging and precise aiming marks, and stable gun mount produced impressive accuracy. Moving targets proved more challenging, as always, but the Comet's quick turret traverse and smooth gun elevation mechanism aided rapid target engagement. Automotive performance validated design calculations. The Meteor engine, already proven in thousands of Cromwells, provided ample power for the Comet's 33-ton weight. Maximum road speed approached 30 miles per hour on good surfaces, with sustained cruising speeds of 20 to 25 miles per hour easily maintained. Cross-country performance benefited from the wider tracks and improved suspension, with ground pressure low enough for reasonable mobility across soft ground and farmland. Reliability emerged as perhaps the Comet's most significant achievement. British cruiser tanks had suffered chronic automotive problems throughout the war. The Crusader experienced frequent cooling system failures and track breakage. Early Cromwells encountered gearbox and final drive problems that limited operational availability. The Comet's improved powertrain, better cooling system, and strengthened running gear largely eliminated these problems. Training units reported mechanical availability rates exceeding 80%, unheard of for British cruiser tanks earlier in the war. But the Ardennes crisis delayed operational deployment even as training progressed. The German offensive, launched on the 16th of December 1944, created immediate demand for reinforcements. Units scheduled to receive Comets in January were instead issued Shermans or retained their Cromwells, deploying to Belgium and Luxembourg to help contain the German breakthrough. The new cruiser tanks remained at Salisbury Plain, their crews watching news reports and wondering when they would join the fighting. By mid-January 1945, the Ardennes situation stabilized. German forces, having failed to reach the Meuse River or capture significant Allied supply dumps, withdrew under pressure from American counterattacks. Allied planners turned attention back to the primary objective, crossing the Rhine and advancing into Germany's industrial heartland. This operation, codenamed Plunder, would require substantial armored forces for exploitation after the initial assault. 29th Armored Brigade received orders for Comet conversion in late January. The brigade, part of 11th Armored Division, had fought through Normandy and Belgium with Cromwells. Now it would receive Britain's newest cruiser tank for the war's final campaign. 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, 2nd Fife and Forfar Yeomanry, and 23rd Hussars, the brigade's 3 armored regiments, sent advance parties to collect vehicles while main bodies completed final training. The conversion process proceeded rapidly. Each regiment received approximately 60 Comets, replacing their Cromwells. Crews underwent abbreviated training. There was no time for the thorough familiarization that peacetime standards would demand. Gunners practiced live firing on hasty ranges. Drivers logged miles on local roads. Maintenance crews studied technical manuals and parts diagrams. Within 3 weeks, the brigade declared itself operational on the new equipment. Other units followed similar schedules. The 2nd Armored Brigade received Comets in February. Additional regiments converted through February and March as production increased and vehicles became available. By late March 1945, approximately 300 Comets were in operational service with British units in Northwest Europe, with several hundred more in production or in the supply pipeline. The vehicles deployed forward by rail and road transport, joining concentration areas near the Rhine. Crews performed final maintenance checks, loaded ammunition and fuel, and studied maps of the terrain beyond the river. The Comet had reached the war. Now it would be tested under the conditions it was designed for: rapid exploitation, armor versus armor combat, and pursuit of a retreating enemy. 5 years of design evolution, 18 months of focused development, and months of production and training were about to be validated or found wanting in the crucible of combat. The Rhine River had protected Western Germany since Roman times. In March 1945, it represented the last major natural barrier before the industrial cities of the Ruhr and the road to Berlin. Allied planners knew that crossing the Rhine would require massive preparation, overwhelming force, and careful coordination. Operation Plunder, scheduled for the night of 23 through 24 March, would involve 2 British and 1 Canadian army, supported by the largest airborne operation since D-Day. 11th Armored Division, with its newly equipped 29th Armored Brigade, was assigned to 12th Corps in the British Second Army. The division would not participate in the initial assault. That task fell to infantry divisions specially trained for river crossings. Instead, 11th Armored would cross once bridging was complete, then exploit east toward the Weser River and beyond. This was exactly the mission that British cruiser tanks were designed for: rapid movement, pursuit of retreating forces, and opportunistic engagement of enemy armor. The Rhine at Wesel measured approximately 350 yards wide, too wide for armored vehicle fording, requiring either bridges or ferries. Engineers planned multiple crossing sites, knowing that German artillery and potential counterattacks might disrupt any single crossing point. Prepositioned bridging equipment, assault boats, and specialized engineer vehicles waited in forward areas, camouflaged against German aerial reconnaissance and artillery observers. The assault began at 9 p.m. on the 23rd of March. Artillery barrages of unprecedented density pounded German positions along the east bank. Smoke screens obscured the river, forcing German defenders to fire blindly toward suspected crossing points. Infantry assault boats pushed off from the west bank, carrying the first waves of troops across the dark, fast-flowing water. Casualties mounted, German machine guns and mortars fired into the smoke. But the assault continued relentlessly. By dawn on the 24th, infantry battalions held shallow bridgeheads on the east bank. Engineers worked frantically to construct bridges capable of bearing tank traffic. Bailey bridges, the modular British design that could be assembled quickly under fire, began taking shape at Ries and Wesel. Class 40 bridges, capable of supporting Churchill tanks, went up first. Class 30 bridges, adequate for medium tanks like Shermans and Comets, followed at additional crossing sites. German resistance focused on artillery fire and small-scale counterattacks. The 1st Parachute Army, defending this sector, possessed limited armored reserves. Most German tank units were deployed farther north or south, or had been destroyed in earlier fighting. The defenders relied primarily on anti-tank guns, Panzerfaust close assault weapons, and prepared defensive positions. They fought skillfully, but they could not prevent the bridgehead from expanding. The 11th Armored Division began crossing on the evening of the 24th. Traffic control became critical. Thousands of vehicles needed to move across a few narrow bridges without creating unmanageable congestion. Military police directed traffic with ruthless efficiency, prioritizing combat units over support elements. Comets of 29th Armored Brigade rolled across Bailey bridges in long columns, tracks clanking on the metal decking, crews watching for enemy artillery fire. The Comet's moderate weight, 33 tons versus 40 tons for Shermans or 38 tons for Cromwells with full combat loads, provided unexpected advantages during the crossing. Engineers rated certain bridges for Class 30 loads, meaning vehicles exceeding 30 tons required careful spacing and slower crossing speeds. The Comet's lighter weight allowed more vehicles to cross simultaneously, improving traffic flow and reducing vulnerability to German artillery. By the morning of the 25th, the division was across and beginning its eastward advance. The terrain beyond the Rhine consisted of flat farmland, small villages, and scattered woodlets. Ideal country for armored exploitation. Roads were adequate for military traffic, though spring rains had softened field surfaces. German forces were withdrawing east, fighting delaying actions at key road junctions and villages but avoiding decisive engagements they could not win. 29th Armored Brigade advanced in column, with reconnaissance elements screening ahead and infantry battalions following the armor. The Comet's published road speed of approximately 30 miles per hour allowed the division to maintain operational tempo, even with necessary halts for reconnaissance and clearing obstacles. Actual movement averaged 15 to 20 miles per hour when accounting for terrain, bypassing minor resistance, and coordinating with adjacent units. The first significant contact occurred on the 26th, when lead elements encountered a German blocking position at a crossroads village. Anti-tank guns, probably 7.5 cm PAK-40 models, engaged the British column from concealed positions. One Comet took a hit on the turret side, penetrating and killing the loader. But the British response was immediate and overwhelming. Comets maneuvered off the road, using their mobility to flank the German position while infantry worked forward under covering fire. The 77mm HV guns engaged the anti-tank positions with high-explosive rounds, silencing the German weapons within minutes. This pattern repeated throughout the exploitation. German forces attempted to slow the British advance with small delaying positions, usually built around anti-tank guns and infantry with Panzerfausts. The Comet's combination of speed, firepower, and adequate armor protection proved effective in these engagements. The vehicles could maneuver rapidly to flank positions. Their guns could engage targets at ranges beyond Panzerfaust effective distance, and their frontal armor resisted all but direct hits from the most powerful German anti-tank weapons. By the 28th of March, 11th Armored Division had advanced more than 30 miles beyond the Rhine, reaching the Dortmund EMS Canal. German resistance was stiffening as Allied forces approached the Ruhr industrial region, but the exploitation phase had succeeded brilliantly. The Rhine barrier, so carefully prepared and defended, had been breached. British armor was ranging deep into Western Germany, and the Comet had passed its first operational test with success. Crews were gaining confidence in their vehicles. Mechanical reliability remained high despite hard usage on German roads. The 77mm HV guns performed as designed, engaging targets with good accuracy and effect. The low silhouette made the Comet easier to conceal than taller vehicles, reducing vulnerability to long-range fire. And the speed, that precious speed that British cavalry doctrine had always emphasized, allowed the division to maintain pressure on withdrawing German forces. The crossing of the Rhine marked a turning point not just in the campaign but in the Comet's operational history. The vehicle had proven itself capable of the exploitation role it was designed for. Now, as British forces pushed deeper into Germany, the Comet would face sterner tests. Engagement with German armor, fighting in closer terrain, and sustained operations against an enemy fighting desperately to defend its homeland. German tactical intelligence units maintained detailed records of Allied equipment throughout the war. As British forces advanced into Germany in March and April 1945, German observers noted a new British tank appearing in increasing numbers. Intelligence summaries described a low-profile cruiser tank with rapid turret traverse and high first-round hit probability. Captured documents and prisoner interrogations gradually pieced together the vehicle's characteristics. Approximately 33 tons, armed with a gun of approximately 75 to 76 mm caliber, but with substantially higher velocity than the standard Sherman's 75 mm gun. This assessment was both accurate and incomplete. German intelligence correctly identified the Comet's low silhouette, good mobility, and effective armament. They noted that the vehicle appeared more reliable than earlier British cruisers, with fewer breakdowns observed during operational movements. They recognized that frontal armor resisted German 50mm and short 75mm anti-tank weapons at typical engagement ranges. What they initially failed to understand was the 77mm gun's true armor penetration capability, particularly when firing APDS ammunition. The 77mm HV shared the same projectile diameter, 76.2 mm, as the 17-pounder gun that German tank crews had learned to fear in Fireflies and Challengers. But the Comet's compact gun didn't look like a 17-pounder. Its shorter barrel and smaller overall dimensions suggested a less powerful weapon. This misidentification initially led German units to underestimate the Comet's anti-armor capability, treating it as equivalent to the Sherman's 75mm gun rather than recognizing it as a near 17-pounder. The confusion was understandable. Ballistic performance depends on projectile design, muzzle velocity, and ammunition type. The 77mm HV firing standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition did perform somewhat below the full 17-pounder's capability, roughly 10% less penetration at typical engagement ranges. But with APDS ammunition, the 77mm HVS performance jumped dramatically. Armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition represented one of the war's most significant gunnery developments. Instead of firing a full-caliber projectile, APDS rounds used a sub-caliber tungsten carbide penetrator carried in a lightweight alloy sabot. After leaving the barrel, the sabot fell away, leaving only the small, dense penetrator flying toward the target at extremely high velocity. The lightweight penetrator achieved velocities approaching 4,000 feet per second, substantially faster than conventional armor-piercing shots. This high velocity translated directly into armor penetration. Against vertical armor plate, the 77mm HV firing APDS could penetrate approximately 170 mm at 1,000 yards, exceeding the full 17-pounder with conventional ammunition. Against sloped armor, penetration varied with impact angle, but the discarding sabot rounds' high velocity helped maintain effectiveness even against steeply angled plates. Comparing the Comet's 77mm HV with APDS to the Panther's KWK-42 gun revealed interesting parity. The Panther mounted a 7.5cm KWK-42 L70 gun, a high-velocity weapon with a 70-caliber barrel length. Firing standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition, the KWK-42 could penetrate approximately 140 mm of vertical armor at 1,000 yards. This gave the Panther superior anti-armor performance compared to most Allied tank guns. But the Comet with APDS matched or exceeded the Panther's penetration at typical combat ranges. This rough parity had significant tactical implications. Panther crews, accustomed to outgunning Sherman 75mm and Cromwell 75mm weapons at extended ranges, expected to engage British cruiser tanks with substantial advantage. Encountering Comets that could penetrate Panther frontal armor at ranges where the Panther could theoretically return fire changed the tactical calculus. The advantage shifted from pure firepower superiority to combined factors, first to fire, accuracy, tactical positioning, and crew skill. However, APDS ammunition came with limitations that affected tactical employment. The sabot separation process introduced variability in projectile flight, degrading accuracy at extended ranges. Beyond 1,500 yards, hit probability decreased substantially. The lightweight penetrator was also more susceptible to wind deflection than heavier conventional shot. And production limitations meant APDS ammunition remained relatively scarce throughout the war. British tactical doctrine emphasized these realities in crew training. Gunners learned to use standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition for most targets, reserving APDS for heavy armor or situations requiring maximum penetration. Range estimation became critical. Engaging Panthers beyond 1,000 yards meant accepting reduced hit probability with APDS, while closing to 500 yards maximized both accuracy and penetration but increased vulnerability to German return fire. German tactical responses evolved as recognition of the Comet's capabilities spread. Intelligence summaries recommended engaging the new British tank from ambush positions at close range, using Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets or attacking from the flank where armor was thinner. Tank versus tank engagements should utilize cover and concealment to negate the Comet's apparent advantage in gun-laying speed and first-round accuracy. If possible, German tanks should avoid frontal engagements at medium ranges where the Comet's 77mm gun proved most effective. These recommendations reflected broader German tactical circumstances in April 1945. Fuel shortages limited German armored mobility. Crew training quality had declined as experienced tankers were killed or captured and replaced with hastily trained conscripts. Panthers and other tanks were increasingly deployed in static defensive positions rather than mobile operations, negating their theoretical speed advantage. Under these conditions, the Comet's combination of mobility, reliability, and effective armament made it a formidable opponent even when German forces possessed theoretically superior tanks. Ammunition logistics also influenced tactical effectiveness. British supply chains consistently delivered fuel, ammunition, and spare parts to forward units. Comet crews could expect regular resupply of all ammunition types, including the scarce APDS rounds. German units increasingly fought with interrupted supply lines, chronic fuel shortages, and limited ammunition stocks. A technically superior tank became less relevant if it couldn't move, couldn't be resupplied, or exhausted its ammunition after brief engagements. By mid-April 1945, the tactical picture had clarified. The Comet was a balanced, effective medium tank with good mobility, adequate protection, and a powerful gun. It wasn't invulnerable. German 88mm guns could destroy it at long ranges, Panzerfaust could kill it at close range, and well-aimed shots from Panthers or Panzer IVs could penetrate if they struck vulnerable points. But in the fluid, fast-moving operations characterizing the final weeks of the European War, the Comet's strengths, speed, reliability, firepower, mattered more than its limitations. German intelligence assessments grudgingly acknowledged the vehicle's quality. One captured bulletin concluded, "The new British cruiser combines speed and firepower effectively. Engagement should be avoided unless advantageous conditions exist for a Wehrmacht apparatus that had spent much of the war dismissing British tank design as inferior." This represented remarkable recognition of what British engineers had finally achieved. The exploitation continued. 11th Armored Division, with 29th Armored Brigade leading, pushed east from the Rhine bridgehead toward the Weser River. Behind them, following in carefully coordinated columns, came infantry divisions, artillery units, supply convoys, and the vast logistical apparatus that sustained Allied armies in the field. Ahead lay a succession of river barriers, the Weser, the Leine, the Aller, each requiring bridging, each potentially defended, each a checkpoint on the road to final victory. The operational pace was punishing. Allied commanders, recognizing that German forces were disintegrating, pushed subordinate units to maintain maximum pressure. The goal was not merely to defeat German forces, but to prevent them from organizing coherent defensive lines. Speed became its own weapon. Rapid advances seized river crossings before German engineers could destroy bridges, overran supply dumps before they could be evacuated, and captured road junctions before defensive positions could be prepared. This style of warfare suited the Comet perfectly. On the 1st of April, lead elements of 29th Armored Brigade advanced more than 25 miles, crossing the Dortmund EMS Canal and securing bridgeheads over smaller streams. German resistance consisted primarily of small rearguards, a few anti-tank guns, infantry detachments with Panzerfausts, occasionally a single tank or assault gun positioned to block a key road junction. These positions typically fired a few rounds, forcing British forces to deploy and maneuver, then withdrew before being overwhelmed. Comet crews developed standard tactical responses to these encounters. Reconnaissance elements, usually armored cars or light tanks, identified German positions through direct contact, drawing fire and then withdrawing. Comet troops, typically 4 or 5 tanks, then maneuvered to flanking positions while infantry worked forward to suppress German infantry. The 77mm guns engaged German positions with high explosive rounds, destroying gun positions and forcing withdrawals. The entire sequence, contact, deployment, flanking maneuver, engagement, advance, often consumed less than 30 minutes. Mechanical reliability proved crucial during this sustained advance. Cromwells, despite their impressive speed, had suffered chronic automotive problems that reduced operational availability to 60 or 70% in hard service. The Comet's improved transmission, strengthened final drives, and better cooling system maintained availability above 80%. When breakdowns occurred, they were typically minor, track pins, idler wheels, electrical problems that field mechanics could repair within hours. Major failures requiring recovery and depot-level maintenance remained rare. Fuel consumption, however, was substantial. The Meteor engine, while reliable, burned approximately 1 gallon per mile under typical operational conditions. A Comet's internal fuel capacity of 110 gallons provided a range of approximately 110 miles on roads, less in cross-country movement. During rapid advances, Comets refueled twice daily, morning and evening, consuming fuel delivered by dedicated transport units following the advancing armor. British logistics officers, drawing on years of desert warfare experience, had refined mobile refueling to a smooth, rapid process. Fuel trucks met armored columns at designated points, crews refueled vehicles individually while maintaining security, and the advance resumed within an hour. The Weser River, reached on the 3rd of April, presented a more serious obstacle than earlier streams. Approximately 200 yards wide at the crossing points, the Weser required substantial bridging and was potentially defensible. German forces attempted to delay the crossing with artillery fire and demolition of existing bridges. But Allied air superiority prevented German reinforcement, and Allied artillery suppressed German gun positions. Engineers completed bridges by the evening of 4th April. 29th Armored Brigade crossed during the night and resumed the advance at dawn on 5th April. Terrain beyond the Weser transitioned from flat farmland to slightly rolling country with more frequent villages and woodlets. This terrain favored defenders, providing more cover and concealment for ambush positions. German resistance increased correspondingly. Engagement ranges decreased from 1,000 yards or more in open country to 500 yards or less in villages and woods. These shorter ranges increased risk to the Comets. Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets, effective to 150 yards, became serious threats in close terrain. Tactical procedures adapted to the environment. Infantry worked more closely with armor, clearing buildings and woods before Comets advanced through potential ambush areas. Artillery fire became more important, suppressing suspected German positions before British forces entered danger areas. Speed, the Comet's great advantage, became less useful when terrain limited movement to roads and tracks flanked by buildings or trees. Despite these challenges, the advance continued. On the 6th April, lead elements reached the Leine River. On the 8th April, they crossed and pushed toward the Aller. Each river crossing followed similar patterns. Reconnaissance to identify crossing sites and German strength, artillery preparation, engineer bridging under fire, and rapid exploitation once armor got across. German forces contested each crossing but lacked the strength to hold. Fuel shortages limited German armored mobility. Ammunition shortages forced the economy into defensive fire. And overwhelming Allied air power destroyed German movement in daylight hours. The Aller crossing, achieved on 11th April, marked significant progress. The division had advanced more than 100 miles in 11 days. An average of nearly 10 miles per day despite multiple river crossings and continuous minor contacts with German forces. Operational tempo exceeded the capabilities of many Allied tanks. Sherman crews, dealing with more frequent mechanical problems and lower speed, struggled to keep pace. Churchill tanks, limited by their maximum road speed of 15 miles per hour, fell progressively behind. But the Comets maintained the pace, their speed and reliability enabling the rapid exploitation that British commanders demanded. Combat losses, remarkably, remained moderate. 29th Armored Brigade lost fewer than 20 Comets during the 11-day advance, approximately 6% of the brigade's strength. Some losses came from German anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts. A few resulted from mines or improvised explosives. 2 or 3 Comets were knocked out in brief tank-versus-tank engagements. But none of these losses suggested fundamental vulnerabilities in the design. The Comet was doing what it was designed to do: advancing rapidly, engaging targets effectively, and maintaining operational availability under hard service. By the evening of 12 April, 11th Armored Division established positions along the Aller River, consolidating bridgeheads and preparing for the next phase of operations. Behind them, the road from the Rhine to the Aller was lined with abandoned German equipment, destroyed vehicles, and prisoners marching west toward Allied prison camps. Ahead lay the final objectives: the Weser-Elbe watershed, the Lüneburg Heath, and ultimately the Baltic coast. The Comet had proven itself in rapid exploitation. Now it would face sterner tests in close combat and sustained operations against increasingly desperate German resistance. The engagement began without warning. A troop of 4 Comets from 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, advancing along a tree-lined road near a small village, took fire from a wood line approximately 600 yards ahead. The first round struck the road surface short of the lead Comet, sending fragments clanging against the hull. The troop commander, immediately recognizing the characteristic crack of a high-velocity gun, ordered deployment off the road into flanking positions. What followed illustrated the Comet's tactical capabilities under close combat conditions. The troops' 4 tanks maneuvered rapidly into hull-down positions using slight undulations in the field. The commander identified the target, a Panther tank partially concealed at the wood edge, and designated it for his gunner. The engagement sequence proceeded by trained reflex. Gunner laid on target, loader confirmed armor-piercing discarding sabot round loaded. Commander gave the fire command. The 77mm gun fired. The first round missed, passing just over the Panther's turret. Range estimation was slightly short. But the second round, fired 10 seconds later with corrected aim, struck the Panther's right hull side at the junction between hull and turret. The tungsten carbide penetrator punched through 70mm of armor plate at approximately 2,500 feet per second, generating lethal spalling fragments inside the German tank. The Panther's turret hatches flew open. Crew members bailed out, running for cover in the woods. A second Panther, previously undetected, fired from deeper in the wood line. This round struck the second British Comet on the turret front, hitting at a steep angle and deflecting upward without penetrating. The struck Comet's crew, momentarily stunned but uninjured, recovered quickly. The gunner traversed toward the muzzle flash location, identified the second Panther, and engaged. 3 rounds of 75mm high explosive followed. The gunner, uncertain of penetration against frontal armor and lacking clear visibility of the target, chose explosive rounds to suppress and blind the German crew. The high explosive rounds detonated on and around the Panther, damaging optics and external equipment. The German tank withdrew deeper into the woods, disappearing from sight. This engagement, recorded in 3rd Royal Tank Regiment's after-action reports, typified Comet vs. Panther combat in April 1945. Engagements occurred at close ranges in restricted terrain. First-round hits were difficult, requiring rapid range estimation and accurate gun laying. The side that detected its opponent first and achieved effective fire first usually prevailed. Superior firepower mattered less than speed, crew training, and tactical positioning. British crews held several advantages in these encounters. Comet training emphasized rapid target engagement, with gunners drilled repeatedly on quick acquisition and first-round accuracy. British tank doctrine stressed the importance of aggressive maneuver to achieve flanking shots, exploiting the Comet's speed and low silhouette. And British crews generally operated with better situational awareness, supported by excellent radio equipment and well-practiced command procedures. German crews, despite often superior equipment, faced multiple disadvantages by April 1945. Many experienced crews were dead, captured, or withdrawn to form cadres for new units. Replacement crews received abbreviated training, sometimes only weeks before entering combat. Fuel shortages limited tactical mobility, forcing Panthers and other tanks into essentially static defensive positions. Ammunition shortages required careful fire discipline, while British tanks fired more freely, supported by abundant ammunition supplies. Technical comparisons between Comet and Panther revealed interesting parallels and differences. The Panther weighed approximately 45 tons versus the Comet's 33 tons. The Panther's frontal armor, 80mm sloped at 55 degrees on the glacis, provided better protection than the Comet's 76mm at a slightly steeper angle. The Panther's KWK-42 gun had a longer barrel, 70 calibers versus approximately 50 calibers for the 77mm HV, producing higher velocity with standard ammunition. But these theoretical advantages diminished in practice. The Panther's greater weight reduced mobility, particularly in soft ground common in northern Germany in spring. The Panther's higher profile, approximately 10 inches taller than the Comet, made concealment more difficult. And the Panther's chronic mechanical problems, particularly with final drives and transmissions, reduced operational availability below 70% in sustained operations. Ammunition effectiveness proved more complex. The Panther's KWK-42 firing standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap ammunition could penetrate approximately 140mm of vertical armor at 1,000 yards. The Comet's 77mm HV with standard armor-piercing shot penetrated approximately 118mm under the same conditions, roughly 15% less. Against the Panther's sloped frontal armor, neither gun reliably penetrated at typical engagement ranges with standard ammunition. But APDS ammunition changed this calculus dramatically. The Comet firing discarding sabot rounds could penetrate the Panther's frontal armor at ranges below 1,000 yards, given favorable impact angles. The Panther had no equivalent ammunition. German sabot round development remained experimental through the war's end. This asymmetry meant that Comet crews with APDS ammunition could, under the right circumstances, penetrate Panthers frontally, while Panther crews could not reliably penetrate Comets frontally with available ammunition. The tactical result was a rough parity between the two designs. Panthers remained formidable opponents. Their armor, gun, and long-range performance were excellent. But Comets could fight Panthers on approximately equal terms, particularly at the close ranges and restricted terrain characteristic of combat in Germany in April 1945. And the Comet's superior reliability, better crew training, and abundant ammunition supply tilted engagements in British favor more often than not. Other German tanks presented different challenges. Panzer IV mediums, still numerous in German units, mounted shorter 75mm guns with less armor penetration capability than the Panther's KWK-42. Comets could penetrate Panzer IV frontal armor reliably at typical combat ranges, while Panzer IVs struggled to penetrate Comet frontal armor except at very close ranges or with flank shots. These engagements typically ended quickly in British favor. German tank destroyers, Jagdpanzer IVs and similar vehicles, carried powerful guns but lacked turrets, limiting tactical flexibility. British crews learned to exploit this limitation, maneuvering to force the German vehicles to reposition their entire hull to maintain gun bearing. The Comet's quick turret traverse and good mobility made this tactic effective, reducing the tank destroyer's theoretical firepower advantage. The net result, visible in unit after-action reports and daily casualty returns, was that Comets fought German armor effectively throughout April 1945. Losses occurred, no tank was invulnerable, but they remained moderate and proportionate to the intensity of combat. More significantly, Comets consistently achieved tactical objectives, supporting infantry advances, overrunning German defensive positions, and maintaining the operational tempo that prevented German forces from organizing coherent defenses. By late April, as Allied forces approached the Elbe River, the tank-versus-tank combat that had characterized earlier weeks diminished. German armored reserves were exhausted. Remaining tanks, immobilized by fuel shortages or mechanical failures, fought from static positions or were abandoned. The war was ending, and with it, the Comet's opportunity to validate fully its design against Germany's best armor. Yet what combat occurred proved the vehicle's essential competence. The Comet could fight Panthers, Panzer IVs, and tank destroyers on equal or advantageous terms. That was what British planners had demanded in November 1943. That was what the vehicle delivered in April 1945. The advance slowed as April transitioned to May. Not from German resistance that was collapsing comprehensively, but from logistics and strategic decision-making at the highest levels. Allied forces approached the Elbe River, the agreed demarcation line, with Soviet forces advancing from the east. Further advance would serve no strategic purpose and risked accidental contact between Allied and Soviet forces. 11th Armored Division, having driven from the Rhine to the Elbe in 6 weeks, established positions along the river and waited. Behind them, across hundreds of miles of German territory, Allied military government detachments began the enormous task of administering occupied Germany. Ahead, across the Elbe, Soviet forces were conducting the final assault on Berlin. The war's end was clearly imminent. For Comet crews, these final days brought mixed emotions. Relief, certainly, they had survived combat in a deadly war. Satisfaction that their vehicle had performed well under demanding conditions. Pride in the advance they had achieved. But also exhaustion and the peculiar anticlimax that comes when intense activity suddenly ceases. Tanks that had been maintained and operated under combat conditions now sat parked in fields, engines silent, guns elevated to safe positions. Maintenance activities increased. Vehicles that had received only hasty field repairs during the advance now underwent thorough inspection. Tracks were replaced, worn components serviced, minor damage repaired. Crews cleaned weapons and vehicles, performed complete maintenance cycles, and began the transition from combat to occupation duties. It was strangely peaceful work after weeks of constant movement and frequent combat. On the 2nd of May, German forces in northern Germany surrendered to the British 21st Army Group. On the 4th of May, all German forces in northwest Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands capitulated. On the 8th of May, the formal German surrender took effect throughout Europe. The war, which had consumed 6 years and cost tens of millions of lives, was over. For the Comet, victory came late in its operational history. The vehicle had entered combat in March 1945, barely 2 months before war's end. It missed Normandy, the breakout, the race across France and Belgium, the entire first year of fighting on the continent. Yet, in those final 2 months, the Comet demonstrated the qualities British engineers had worked to achieve: speed, firepower, reliability, and the balanced combination of characteristics that made effective armored exploitation possible. Approximately 1,145 Comets were completed by war's end, of which perhaps 350 to 400 reached operational units before May 1945. This represented a fraction of total British tank strength in Europe and a tiny fraction of total Allied armored vehicles. Yet, the Comet's influence exceeded its numbers. The vehicle proved that British industry could produce competitive medium tanks. It demonstrated that thoughtful design, systematic testing, and attention to reliability could overcome earlier failures. The Comet's operational service record, though brief, was remarkably successful. Mechanical availability remained above 80% throughout the final campaign. Combat losses were moderate, fewer than 40 vehicles destroyed in combat versus several hundred participating in operations. The vehicle achieved tactical objectives consistently, advancing rapidly, engaging German forces effectively, and supporting combined arms operations as doctrine intended. Crew opinions, collected in post-combat interviews and assessments, were generally positive. Gunners praised the 77mm HVS accuracy and armor penetration. Drivers appreciated the reliable Meteor engine and smooth transmission. Commanders valued the low silhouette and good vision devices. Loaders noted the compact turret but acknowledged that ammunition stowage was adequate and arrangement logical. Maintenance crews reported that the vehicle was substantially more reliable than earlier British cruisers and easier to service than American-supplied Shermans. The German assessment, visible in captured documents and post-war interrogations, recognized the Comet as a competent design. One senior German officer, asked about Allied tank quality, placed the Comet in the same class as the Panther, high praise from an army that had emphasized armor design throughout the war. Another officer noted that the Comet combined good mobility with adequate protection and effective armament, making it a balanced design that we struggled to achieve ourselves. Yet the Comet arrived too late to influence the war's outcome significantly. By March 1945, German defeat was inevitable. Allied superiority in numbers, production, logistics, and air power would have achieved victory regardless of specific tank designs. The Comet's contribution was to make that victory somewhat faster and less costly in British casualties, a meaningful achievement but not strategically decisive. Post-war, the Comet remained in British Army service for more than a decade. Units equipped with Comets served in occupation duties in Germany and Austria. Some vehicles were exported to Allied nations. The design influenced subsequent British tank development, particularly an emphasis on gun performance, automotive reliability, and balanced characteristics. The Centurion tank, which entered production as the war ended and became Britain's main battle tank for decades, incorporated lessons learned from Comet development and operational experience. By the mid-1950s, the Comet was obsolete. New tank guns, more powerful engines, and improved armor materials rendered the design outdated. The vehicle was gradually withdrawn from frontline service, replaced by Centurions and later designs. Some Comets served in training roles. Others were sold to foreign militaries or sent to museums. A few survive today in museum collections, preserved as examples of late-war British tank design. The Comet's historical significance lies less in what it achieved, though its operational record was credible, than in what it represented. After years of inadequate tank design, production difficulties, and operational failures, British industry finally produced a medium tank that met modern combat requirements. The vehicle arrived too late to matter strategically, but it proved that British designers and manufacturers could compete with German and American tank development when given adequate time, resources, and engineering attention. For the crews who fought in Comets during those final weeks of the European War, the vehicle was simply a tool, generally reliable, adequately armed, and fit for purpose. They appreciated its qualities without romanticizing them. The Comet got them across Germany, supported the infantry they worked with, and brought most of them home alive. That was what mattered. On the 8th of May, 1945, as victory celebrations erupted across Britain and church bells rang for the first time since 1940, rows of Comets sat parked in German fields, silent and still. Their war was over. Their brief operational history, barely 2 months, had ended successfully. The vehicle that British engineers began designing in November 1943 had proven itself in the test that mattered most: combat against a skilled and determined enemy. That was an achievement enough. In the vast vehicle halls of the Tank Museum at Bovington, among dozens of preserved armored fighting vehicles, sits a restored Comet tank. The vehicle, serial number unknown but probably manufactured in early 1945, wears authentic late-war British Army markings. The dark olive drab paint, carefully matched to original specifications, shows the weathering that comes with outdoor display and time. The tracks, properly tensioned by museum conservators, rest on reinforced floor plates capable of supporting 33 tons. Visitors approaching the Comet for the first time often pause, surprised by its size. Modern main battle tanks, weighing 60 or 70 tons and mounting 120mm or larger guns, dwarf the modest vehicle before them. The Comet looks almost small, its low profile and compact turret suggesting agility rather than overwhelming power. Yet those who study its lines see what British designers achieved: a balanced integration of mobility, protection, and firepower within constraints of weight and production capability. The museum's information placard provides essential statistics. Weight: approximately 33 tons. Crew: 5 commander, gunner, loader, driver, hull gunner. Armament: 1 ordnance quick-firing 77mm Mark, 2 high-velocity guns, 2 Besa machine guns. Armor: 14 to 101 millimeters, depending on location. Engine: Rolls-Royce Meteor V12, 600 horsepower. Maximum speed: approximately 29 miles per hour on roads. Production: approximately 1,145 completed. Service: 1945 through mid-1950s. These numbers, precise and factual, tell part of the story. But they cannot convey what the Comet meant to the crews who operated it, the engineers who designed it, or the broader narrative of British tank development during the Second World War. Numbers describe objects. History requires context. The Comet emerged from years of frustration and failure. British tank design in the early war years produced vehicles that were, at best, adequate and, at worst, dangerously inadequate. Cruiser tanks broke down frequently. Infantry tanks were too slow for exploitation operations. Armor protection was insufficient. Main armament was outclassed by German guns. Production quality was inconsistent. The British Army, fighting across North Africa, Italy, and eventually France, made do with vehicles that their crews knew were inferior to German designs. The Comet represented a conscious attempt to change this pattern. Engineers studied combat reports, analyzed German designs, and systematically addressed known deficiencies. They chose proven components, the Meteor engine, the Christie suspension, and improved them. They developed a new gun that balanced firepower against space constraints. They emphasized reliability, recognizing that a tank that breaks down contributes nothing regardless of its theoretical capabilities. The result was not a revolutionary design but an evolutionary one. A careful synthesis of existing technologies into a balanced, competent vehicle. That the Comet arrived too late to influence the war's outcome frustrates historical assessment. We cannot know how the vehicle would have performed had it reached operational units in summer 1944, participating in Normandy, the Falaise Pocket, Market Garden, the liberation of Belgium, and the Netherlands. We can only evaluate what actually occurred. 2 months of combat in the war's final campaign, under conditions where German resistance was collapsing and Allied victory was assured. Yet within those limitations, the Comet performed credibly. It advanced hundreds of miles with high mechanical availability. It engaged German armor successfully. It supported infantry operations effectively. Crews trusted the vehicle and operated it with confidence. These outcomes, while not spectacular, represented genuine achievement after years of British tank design shortcomings. The preserved Comet at Bovington serves as a memorial to more than just one vehicle design. It commemorates the engineers who worked exhaustively to solve technical problems under wartime pressure. It honors the factory workers who manufactured tanks with care and skill despite bombing, rationing, and personal hardship. It remembers the crews who operated these vehicles in combat, accepting risk and performing their duties with professionalism. And it stands as an artifact of a specific moment in military technical history, the end of the Second World War, when mechanized warfare had reached maturity but not yet entered the atomic age. Future tank designers studied the Comet's lessons. The importance of reliability influenced post-war British tank development. The 77mm gun's design informed subsequent weapon development. The emphasis on balance characteristics, avoiding excessive specialization, shaped thinking about tank requirements for decades. The Centurion, Britain's most successful tank design, incorporated many principles first proven in the Comet. But the Comet's significance extends beyond technical legacy. The vehicle represents what ordinary people, engineers, workers, soldiers, can achieve when working toward common purpose. Tank design requires collaboration among specialists. Metallurgists, automotive engineers, ballistics experts, armor specialists, ergonomics designers, production planners. The Comet proved that British industry could coordinate these disciplines successfully when necessity demanded and leadership provided support. Today's museum visitors, many born decades after the war's end, approach the preserved Comet with curiosity rather than personal memory. They photograph the vehicle, read the information placard, perhaps touch the cold metal of the gun barrel or the rough rubber of the track pads. Few understand the technical details. Most cannot imagine the experience of operating this machine in combat. The noise, the heat, the fear, the physical exhaustion, the intimate knowledge that a thin armor plate was all that stood between life and death. Yet something communicates across the years. This object, now silent and still, once moved with purpose across European landscapes. Men lived inside its cramped interior, performing tasks that required skill, courage, and teamwork. The vehicle participated in events of historical consequence: the defeat of Nazi Germany, the liberation of occupied Europe, the conclusion of history's most destructive war. It is simultaneously an artifact of industrial production, an example of engineering design, and a memorial to human experience. The tank museum conservators maintain the Comet with appropriate care. The vehicle undergoes periodic inspection. Surface rust is removed and treated. Missing components are replaced with authentic parts when possible or accurate reproductions when necessary. The goal is preservation, not restoration to operational condition. The Comet will never move under its own power again. But it will remain, as long as institutional commitment and resources permit, as a physical link to its historical moment. Fewer than a dozen Comets survive worldwide. Most operational vehicles were scrapped in the 1950s and 60s, their metal recycled for peacetime purposes. A few were exported to foreign militaries and operated until worn out. Individual vehicles ended as targets on firing ranges, monuments in parks, or derelict hulks awaiting demolition. The survival of any example represents a fortunate accident rather than systematic preservation effort. The Comet at Bovington stands as representative of all the others: the 1,000+ vehicles manufactured, the hundreds that saw combat, the dozens destroyed in action or lost to mechanical failure or accidents. Each of those vehicles had its own history: specific crews, particular engagements, unique malfunctions, and repairs. Most of these individual stories are lost, surviving only as fragments in after-action reports or brief mentions in unit histories. The preserved vehicle embodies them all. On quiet days at the museum, when visitor numbers are low and the vast halls echo with footsteps, the Comet rests in shadow and artificial light. The gun barrel points toward nothing in particular. The turret, positioned at an arbitrary angle, suggests readiness that no longer exists. The tracks, properly maintained but never to move again, lie still on their supporting floor. It is a machine that once had a purpose and now serves as a reminder of that purpose. A memorial fashioned from steel, rubber, and human effort. The Comet's war lasted 8 weeks. Its operational service spanned a decade. Its preservation will continue, resources permitting, indefinitely. In this way, a vehicle designed for temporary utility achieves unexpected permanence. What began as response to immediate military necessity became an artifact of historical significance, educational resource, and memorial. Metal endures when memory fades. The preserved Comet ensures that some part of its story, the design effort, the combat employment, the human experience, remains accessible to future generations who will know the Second World War only through study and preserved artifacts. That is sufficient for an obsolete tank. Not glory, not celebration, but memory maintained through physical presence. The Comet at Bovington stands not as a monument to victory, though British forces did prevail, but as witness to effort, sacrifice, and the vast complexity of mechanized warfare. It reminds us that tanks are simultaneously industrial products, military tools, and environments where human beings lived, worked, and sometimes died. These multiple meanings coexist in the preserved vehicle, waiting for visitors who take time to look, read, and understand. The placard concludes with a simple statement: A-34 Comet, British cruiser tank. 1945, 12 words. Absolute accuracy, zero context. But the vehicle itself provides context for those willing to engage. History is not merely dates and statistics. It is a physical object, preserved and interpreted. It is a connection across decades between past experience and present understanding. It is a memory maintained through museum work, research, education, and care. What is your perspective on this part of history? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every memory and reflection helps keep the past alive.